What is going on, full-time family? We've got a couple other things I wanted to talk about, and the first one being George St. Pierre theorizing on UFC refusing to make the super fight between him and Khabib Nurmagomedov. Also, George St. Pierre talked about retirement and what he's looking for if he does ever unretire, which I believe will happen. Now, GSP has not changed, his motives from his last fight to coming back and fighting Michael Bisping till now. George St. Pierre only wants legacy fights and big money fights. It's got to meet both of those criterias. So, for it to be a legacy fight, it's got to be something that is going to maybe be another title in another division, or taking Khabib Zero, who's known as one of the best pound-for-pound fighters on the planet, undefeated. So if he could fight Khabib, that would be a legacy fight at this point. In as far as a money fight, Khabib Nurmagomedov is one of the biggest stars in the sport as well, so he checks off all of those boxes. Now, as far as why the UFC does not want to make the fight in George St. Pierre's mind, he said it's similar to why they didn't want to make the Bisping fight. They know I'm coming for a one-off fight. They don't want me to win a fight and become champion and just hold up a division or vacate the title. They don't want me to just run off into the sunset with the belt. If you know how, promotions work, then generally they don't like to let champions leave with the belt. They usually, if a fighter's going to become a free agent or something like that, if you're a champion, you usually get a really good contract extension. But if you're about to become a free agent, the UFC even tends to not give those people title shots if they're going to become a free agent in like one fight, because it would be a terrible business move for the UFC. If you give someone a title shot, they win the title, and then they go to Bellator or One or PFL, and they can say, look, we've got the best in the world. And it's because these people use the UFC's platform to run off and get a big paycheck from someone else. That's why the UFC doesn't do that. And so, with that being said, that's one of the holdups with George St. Pierre. They don't want him to do leading up to the Bisping fight, Dana White talked about how he didn't want George St. Pierre to win a fight and run off, and retire again. And that's exactly what happened. And so now George St. Pierre has retired, and he's talking about potentially coming back. Now, I will say this one thing. I do think this is a little different, because I don't see George St. Pierre, winning and running off to another promotion. I think that's why the UFC will ultimately let him come back. And when the time is right, when the fight is right, right now we've got to see Khabib versus Poirier. He's the interim champion. And next, we have to see Ferguson. Everyone knows Tony Ferguson deserves the next title shot. You can't let George St. Pierre skip Tony Ferguson. And then what's after that? Who knows? That's when we could talk about George St. Pierre potentially coming back. Unless Khabib wants to fight Conor again. But either way, right now, it's just not the right time to let George St. Pierre come in and muddy the waters and potentially win a belt. And, Tony Ferguson and Poirier, the interim champion, all these guys have to wait longer. So, with that being said, George St. Pierre said this: I'm retired. I retired because I didn't want to go back and do the same thing over and over again. Taking a fight takes a lot out of me, because I'm very proud when I perform, so I have to do it the best I can, and the result matters very much for me. So it takes a lot of stress on me. I didn't want to take another training camp, 2 to 3 months, maybe 6 months, with the whole building up and the promotion and everything out of my life to fight another guy that I have nothing to gain in terms of legacy. If I fight someone and I take 6 months of my life to focus on it, I would need that to be worth it to me. Not only money-wise, but legacy-wise and satisfaction-wise. That's why I wanted to fight Khabib, because I could have lost big, but at least I could have won big. And and that's a good point. Now, where would they fight though? This is one of the things as well. One of the holdups. George St. Pierre has always been a welterweight, and most recently he fought at middleweight, 185 pounds. Khabib fights at 155 pounds. George St. Pierre's never cut that low. So we have seen George St. Pierre looking thinner than ever, but could he make 155 pounds? That we do not know. Now, there has been talks of opening up a 165-pound weight division, which would be the ultimate legacy fight for George St. Pierre. You get to fight in the very first title fight of a brand new division, And when you talk about one of, like, the nostalgia of the welterweight division, the 175-pound division, is why a lot of people don't want to get rid of it, because the UFC has so much history in that 170-pound division. And some of that history, of course, being George St. Pierre's legacy in that weight class. Well, it would be a caveat. It would be a awesome, it would be like throwing George St. Pierre a bone if you could let him break in the 165-pound division. So, well, his legacy at 170, the 170-pound division, yes, that weight class would be gone, but at least George St. Pierre would still be forever remembered in this new 165-pound division if he was able to help bring it in, because it's going to come. Even if it's not this year, I think Dana White talked with the Schmo and said, like, not for at least 7 years, but it's going to come. And there would be no better fight to break that in than George St. Pierre and Khabib Nurmagomedov, if Khabib can get past Poirier and Ferguson, which are both the best fighters he's ever fought thus far in his career. So those are some serious tests. Dustin Poirier, I mean, and oh man, I haven't even talked about it. Khabib's weight cut. He's missed weight multiple times in the past, and now he's got more money than ever, doing more media than ever, and I mean, probably the tiramisu is better than ever. Okay, but seriously, the weight cut, that could be a serious problem for Khabib. I've heard he's cutting all the way down from 194 pounds. So he's cutting about 40 pounds. So that could be an issue. And if Khabib missed weight, that would just be wild. But either way, this was about George St. Pierre. He said, if I ever come back, it's not impossible. But right now, I don't see anything. The UFC refuses to fight with Khabib, and there's nothing that really excites me. So pretty much for GSP, it's Khabib or bust. So unless Khabib's schedule opens up and the UFC's willing to let George St. Pierre come back and fight him, George St. Pierre doesn't plan on unretiring anytime soon. And that's what my prediction has been. If you listen, I put it in Discord and on a video just to be safe. I do think George St. Pierre's coming back, and I do think hopefully he'll be fighting Khabib. But Khabib has to play his part. He's got to win all of his fights, and that would be an amazing fight, a legacy fight, and one of the biggest fights of all time. Khabib Nurmagomedov versus George St. Pierre. With that being said, it is what it is. Let the full-time family know what you think in the comments.